Today we are going over the top 10 abandoned places in Minnesota. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of abandoned places in Minnesota, so make sure you like if you want to see a part 2. Today the list is going to start off easy, and the spots are going to get cooler and cooler as the list goes on, so make sure you stay until the end. With that being said, the first spot on our list is Anoka State Hospital in Anoka. A group of buildings along the Rum River opened as an asylum for the mentally ill in 1900. This was the first asylum in the state of Minnesota. Upon opening in 1900, the asylum housed 100 male patients. Female patients would be added to the facility just a few years later, and the population of the asylum grew exponentially in the early 1900s. By mid-century, the Anoka State Hospital housed over 1,000 patients. The hospital was instrumental in developing electroshock therapy, which was a torturous practice. Lobotomies were performed on the grounds and often botched, killing patients rather than curing them. Torture-like devices and restraints can still be found on the grounds. The Anoka State Hospital dug holes to place the bodies of deceased residents and simply marked them with a number. Many years later, a devoted few researched each patient and was able to give them a name and a headstone. Every building of the Anoka State Hospital was connected by a series of underground tunnels. When patients would attempt to escape the asylum, they would often get lost in the tunnels, and some ended up killing themselves within the catacombs. There are remnants of scratches on the underground concrete walls, as reported by those who have seen the grounds. Anoka Hospital closed its doors in 1999 and let the sinister dealings of its past stop interfering with necessary care for people battling mental health issues. Eli's Tunnel in Duluth. During the height of the iron ore boom, train transportation of raw materials from the Iron Range in north-central Minnesota to the port towns along Lake Superior was an essential element in a booming industry. Every day, trains barreled through the northern Minnesota landscape. It was a sign of prosperous times in the region. Being one of the first railways to run into the area, the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range Railroad took advantage of the most direct path into Duluth, so when the other railroads came about, they had to take a more scenic route. The Duluth, Winnipeg, and Pacific Railway was created to connect Virginia with the yard in West Duluth. Since DM and IR had the easiest route, DWP planned their railway to run to the west. This route created one very large challenge, Eli's Peak. The DWP railway track was laid within the Magny-Snively Natural Area. Magny-Snively is an expansive nature reserve located just past where Spirit Mountain is today. It ascended into a formation known as Eli's Peak, in the area now known as Short Line Peak. From there, the railway would descend into the town of Duluth. However, rather than going over Eli's Peak, the train passed through Eli's Peak. Construction of the tunnel took over a year. Crews worked slowly and carefully on the 520-foot Eli Tunnel, clearing only about 10 feet per day. In the fall of 1911, the first track of the DWP tunnel at Eli's Peak was laid. They completed the route to Duluth in 1912. After that, almost daily a train would pass through the tunnel. Several large shifts in the iron ore industry happened in the 1980s. One of these shifts was a merger between WP Railway and the Canadian National Railroad. The merger meant trains from Virginia to Duluth now had a more direct path. As a result, Eli's Tunnel ceased seeing daily train traffic. Then, at some point in the mid-90s, the railway was abandoned altogether, and the DWP tracks were pulled up. UMore Park Munitions plant in Rosemount. In 1943, the U.S. government took control over 12,000 acres of farmland, about 20 miles south of Minneapolis, to build a munitions plant to produce smokeless gunpowder and other artillery byproducts. The plant was given the name of Gopher Ordnance Works, but by the time it was up and running in January of 1945, the end of the war was only 7 months away. That quickly curtailed the need for large quantities of gunpowder, and the plant soon sat idle. 2 years later, the land was deeded to the University of Minnesota, and since then it has been used mostly for academic research and agricultural projects. Bunge Grain Elevator in Minneapolis. The Bunge Grain Elevator represents the ruins of the milling industry that once was the livelihood of Minneapolis. Most of the windows are broken, and the interior is splashed with graffiti and littered with debris and trash. Though the property owner has attempted to deter trespassers by erecting fences and even welding the doors and windows shut, determined explorers still manage to get inside on a regular basis. In 2015, a 20-year-old student at the University of Minnesota fell nearly 3 stories to her death while attempting to climb up the structure's interior. ADM Mill in Minneapolis. The abandoned grain silos are relics of the old Archer Daniels Midland Mill that once operated in the neighborhood of Minneapolis. However, the faded ADM initials on the side of the concrete towers are dwarfed by the work of the daring graffiti artists who painted the words United Crushers at the top of these urban monoliths. The blocky white letters have been painted on the structure for years, and their visibility from I-94 has transformed the abandoned facility into an unlikely icon of the city. Though the Shutter Mill remains at risk due to expansion plans by the University of Minnesota, the structure remains standing as a popular destination for urban adventurers in the region. Sawyer Public School. I could only find a very small amount of information about the school, considering its discreetness and its rural town, but I was able to find that the school opened in 1922 and closed just 38 years later. It is known that at some point the building transformed into apartments, and eventually it caught on fire, leading to abandonment. Weedtown Outlet Speedway in Fergus Falls. Opened in 1962 under a different name of Lake Region Speedway, and also known as West Central Speedway, the track has had issues throughout the years of operation, with water flooding. The track finally had to close in 1993 because the flooding got too bad and they couldn't stop the problem. Hollywood Theater in Minneapolis. This dilapidated landmark is now owned by the city of Minneapolis, who have actively been seeking buyers to renovate the Art Deco-style theater to its former glory. The Hollywood existed as a movie theater from the time of its opening in 1935 until its closing in 1987. It has since been declared an official historic landmark. Until the city finds a buyer, it will continue to sit abandoned. Hamm's Brewery in St. Paul. Before Theodore Hamm crossed the ocean from Germany, he was trained as a butcher, but by the time he founded himself in St. Paul, Minnesota, he was known as a saloon proprietor and boarding house manager. That all changed in 1894, when Hamm hired a Chicago architect to build him a brewery in St. Paul on a site he had purchased prior. Thanks to the super pure water from the brewery's wells and its utilization of the native sandstone for aging caves, the operation grew quick. By 1910, the brewery was shipping 700,000 barrels yearly. The family did so well that they built themselves a mansion behind the brewery, a Queen Anne-style mansion. Behind the brewery today, there are still stairs that lead from behind the keg wash house up the hill, though an arsonist destroyed the house itself in 1954. By the numbers, the decade of 1948 to 1958 saw a 50% decrease in the number of breweries in the country, bringing the total to around 250. In that highly competitive market, Hamm's ranked 5th place. But the beer was not something Hamm's was positioned to win. The brand was not recognizable enough compared to Busch, Miller, and Coors. While the company celebrated its centennial in 1964, it was looking for buyers. First, the company was bought by its own distributors, but they could not muster the capital to hold on to their winnings. So in 1975, they sold to Olympia Brewing. Things got complicated in 1983, when Pabst bought Olympia, drawing the attention of antitrust lawyers. To protect themselves, Pabst made a deal to trade Hamm's to Stroh's, the last operator of the brewery. Strangely, because of the terms of this contract, Stroh's brewed the Hamm's recipe in their Milwaukee plant, while Hamm's brewed the Stroh's recipe in the St. Paul's plant. This could have been a contributing factor in the fall of the brand, reinforcing the negative public sentiment of watching a hometown family-owned brand be traded between corporations for decades. St. Paul always could taste the difference. In 1977, it was announced that St. Paul factory was going to be shut down. Fergus Falls State Hospital in Fergus Falls. In 1985, Fergus Falls State Hospital became Fergus Falls Regional Treatment Center, as the mission shifted to providing local services to individuals with developmental disabilities or chemical dependency. The entire facility has been closed since 2005, and the cost of maintenance for the building threatens its longevity. Friends of the Kirkbride is a group dedicated to saving the historic building, and many plans to repurpose it have been considered, yet nothing has seemed to come to fruition. Those are the top 10 abandoned places in Minnesota. Make sure you guys like and subscribe if you want to see a part 2. Thank you for watching.